This child-sized backpack is perfect for nursery, for school, for weekends away, going out to play, or even picnics. There's lots of pockets. So on the side, there's an elasticated pocket on each side. There's a patch pocket on the inside, and it fastens with both a magnetic snap and a drawstring too. And you can see on the back, you've got adjustable straps there as well. Now, all of your materials and your measurements, your cutting measurements, are all in the description box below the video. So have a look at the video, check out all of your materials and get sewing. So the first thing I'm going to do is to put the flap together. So on the wrong side of the outer piece, I've put my H640 fusible fleece, and I'm going to fit the popper to the lining side. And you can see I've also just rounded off the corners. So I just did that freehand. If you've got a small circle template, such as an egg cup or a drinking glass, then just draw around the edge of there and cut it. So I'm going to put the thinner part of the clasp on the flap side. And we'll do that by folding the fabric in half so I can crease the centre line. And I'm going to put a little mark right over the centre point, about 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres from the bottom. That might be quite difficult to see because my fabric is so heavily patterned, but I've got 2 little dots here. I'm actually going to put a little piece of fabric behind here to stabilise it a little bit. Just make the join a little bit stronger. So just a little scrap of any kind of fabric, you won't see it. I'm going to hold that in place with a little bit of glue. So that goes underneath my mark. And then take a quick unpick and make a little hole over each one of the marks that I've just made. Make it a small hole. It's easier to make a small hole bigger than it is to make a big hole smaller. And then we'll pop the prongs through here. There we go. Put the back on and squish the prongs open. And then these 2 pieces are going to be sewn right sides together all the way around the bottom 3 sides. I'm going to trim just around the curved sections here to cut down on the bulk. And then turn this the right side out. Push out those corners and we'll press this. I just need to switch my iron on. And then we'll top stitch around the edge. So a nice neat top stitch all the way around these bottom 3 sides. Then we'll put that to one side for a minute while we make up the pockets. So these are going to be the elasticated pockets that go on each side of the bag. So the first thing I'm going to do is to sew across the top of these, right sides together, so just across the top of there. again do the same with the second pair. And then I'm going to sew straight across the bottom as well, so I'm making these into tubes. Let's turn these the right side out. And again, we will give them a press. So just making sure the seam's sitting right along the top and the bottom. And the same on this one. Then take your elastic, and this is going to be slightly longer than the size of the pocket, just to make it a little bit easier to work with. That will be cut down shortly. We're going to thread this inside the top of the pocket right up to the top, and sew just down here, just to hold one end in place. So push it right up into the seam and just sew close to the edge. So that's now fixed into the corner, and then I'm going to sew a channel just underneath the elastic. So I'm using quite a narrow elastic. If yours is a little bit wider, you still sew underneath the elastic so you don't actually catch the elastic in the needle, and you can feel that as you're sewing. Just keep pushing it out of the way if it does get in the way. And the same with the second piece, so push that into the top, right into the seam. Sew over the end to secure it. And again, sew the channel just underneath the elastic. And these are going to go on to the side panels, so we'll do that now. I've just caught a bit of the elastic in that one, actually, after saying don't catch the elastic. But I can feel where it is, so I'm just going to unpick a few stitches here and re-sew it. That's better. Now the elastic can be pulled freely through the channel. So let's take the side panels. And I'm going to place the pocket about 3 inches from the bottom here. That's the side where the elastic was secure. Just measure that so it's straight. And I'm just going to sew along this side. Within the seam allowance, so close to the edge, just to hold the pocket in place. Then I'm going to pull the elastic until the pocket is the same width as the side panel. So we don't want that too tight because we don't want this to happen. So just so that it's the same width there, make sure that that's the same distance from the top as this one. Again, if you wanted to measure that and make it exact, then you can do. And then we'll sew down this side of the pocket. And now I can snip off the ends of the elastic. Now across the bottom, let's evenly space out that gathering. I'm just going to make this into 2 little pleats. So no need to measure that, just make it nice and even, or as best as you can. To be honest, with a pattern fabric like this, you won't see anyway if they're not perfect. So we'll have a couple of pins in here. And this time we'll sew straight across the bottom. And then we'll do the same with the second panel. And we'll put those to one side for a second. Let's make the pocket to go on the inside of the bag. So this is just a patch pocket. So I've taken my pocket fabric and folded it in half. And then sewed this into a tube. Turn it the right side out, and again we'll give this a press. I'm just actually rolling the seam so that it's away from the edge. Take one of your lining pieces, well, let's top stitch across there, that gives it a nice finish. We'll do that first. So just top stitch along one edge. And then this is going to go on top of one of the lining pieces like so. And let's make that 2.5 inches from the bottom. Mine's come up a tiny little bit short of the lining fabric for some reason, but I'm not concerned because that will disappear into my seam allowance anyway, so don't worry about that. And I'm going to sew down the sides, and we'll have a divider line down the centre as well, I think. So to make the divide, I'm going to fold this in half and crease the centre, and then I'm just going to sew straight over here to make that one pocket into 2. Now you don't have to do that, or you could make them even smaller if you wish, if you want to keep pens and pencils and things like that in it. So you could make very narrow pockets and have pen pockets. Make sure you backstitch at the top and the end of those seams, because that's where the seam is going to be most vulnerable when things are put into the pockets. So let's make up the back of the bag now, and just before we start to construct, I'm going to make the corners of the bag slightly round. So let's take all of the pieces and something round to use as a template. So I've got a ribbon reel, and I'm just going to, there you are, just draw around the corner. So again, it's not a huge circle, but use a template of some sort this time because we need all of these corners to be exactly the same. And on the lining pieces as well. So because they haven't got the wadding on them, I can actually fold that in half and cut, which makes it a little bit easier. So again, it's just taking off the very corners and giving the bag a little bit of shape. Now at the top of the bag, I've actually made a little strap. So I folded the fabric in half and then in half again. So long sides to the centre and then in half again, and just stitch down one edge. I'm just going to make a little mark in the centre back of my bag and take my ruler. And we're going to have this about 2.5 inches from each side of that centre crease. So I'll just pop a couple of clips in there to hold it for now. Make sure the strap isn't twisted. There we go. And then we'll just sew across the top of those to hold them in place before we put the straps on. And take your smaller webbing pieces. We're going to thread this through a rectangle ring and place it facing inwards just above the curve of the fabric here, and I'm going to angle it very slightly. The same with the second one, just make sure that they're same distance apart. I can measure that to make sure they're the same. So that's 2 inches from the bottom. And do the same on this side. Again, just facing inwards slightly. We need to make sure that the metalwork is kept away from the edge of the fabric. So don't have these too short because we don't want to hit those with your sewing machine needle. It will break. And let's just sew those in place. And then I can trim the ends off. With the longer straps, I've taken one end through the centre of the slider and sew across here with a zigzag stitch, and I've done that with both pieces. And then with the seam here facing upwards, you're going to take the opposite end through the rectangle ring, make sure it's not twisted, that is, and then back through the slider, out the opposite side of the slider, and then this end is going to go just to one side of the handle. And I'm going to keep that quite short because it'll keep the strap out of the way while I'm finishing the bag. So again, with the seam here facing upwards, go through the rectangle ring, twist it again, back through the slider, back again through the slider, and this goes to the opposite side the same distance away, and we'll sew across those. As you can see, the webbing frays quite a lot. So let's just tidy that up. Okay, now we're going to put the sides and the base together. So right sides together. We'll just sew across here. And then pop the second piece on here. Make sure the pockets are facing the right way. Now I'm just going to mark the center of the base, and I'm going to do that by making a tiny snip. So fold this in half and a tiny snip, so that's within the seam allowance. And then we'll do the same here with the front of the bag. Tiny snip. And the same with the back of the bag. And then we'll line these up. I'll use some pins for this one. Now you may find that the sides are slightly too long. Move that out of the way. Or slightly too short, because that depends entirely on the measure of the curve that you've cut, if that makes sense. So if your curve is a little bit deeper than mine, you may find that the straps are too long. So if you've only cut a very small amount off the corner, sorry, the sides could be too long. There we go. That matches perfectly. If they are a little bit too long, then just snip a little bit off. But lots of pins, just to make sure this is sitting evenly. Also. Just before we move on to the second side, I'm going to sew the flap across the back of the bag. The second half of the magnetic snap I'm going to sew on after the bag's been put together, so we can get it in exactly the right place. So this goes on the back here with the magnetic snap facing upwards, and that sits very nicely over the two straps. It doesn't matter if they don't line up perfectly. So depending on your exact position of the straps, you may see some, you may not, but that really doesn't matter. Let's have a couple of clips in here. And then we'll sew straight across there, again within the seam allowance, so quite close to the edge. Now if you have a walking foot, now would be a good time to use it when you've got lots of layers of fabric. And sometimes on a flap like this, you can sometimes get the fabric puckering a little bit. So I'm just pulling that straight to prevent that. If you've got a walking foot, then that's probably not going to happen. May well be worth investing in one. Now let's put the front of the bag in. So just like before, lots of pins so we know that that's sitting evenly, and then we'll sew all the way around again. So let's turn it the right side out, make sure I've caught all of the seams and my curves are looking nice and curvy and I don't have any puckers in the seams, and it's all looking good. It's all looking good. Now let's put the second half of the magnetic snap on. So I'm lining up the seams so I know that this is sitting flat. Let's take the flap over. Now we need to make it not too tight over here, because remember your bag has got a width here. So although this is going to be gathered, we don't want that too tight. So I'm going to fold it with leaving kind of a loop there of about 1.5 inches on each side. So keeping this nice and straight and central, so it's the same distance from the seams at each side. Measure that if you wish. I'm just going to fold this up and make a mark where the snap's going to go, and I will measure that to make sure that it is central, which is perfect. And then we'll fit the second half of the magnetic snap straight over that mark, just the same way as we did with the first one. So draw a little line each side, take your quick unpick or a very sharp pair of scissors and just make a small incision over those two lines. I don't need to put any backing fabric on this one to support it because I've already got the fusible fleece on the back. That goes on there and they squish open. So now let's make up the lining. So the lining is going to go together in just the same way as the outside of the bag did. So I need to sew the two side pieces to the base. Like so. So these two will be sewn right sides together, and then in turn this will be sewn to the lining side of the bag in just the same way. So clip the bottom, match the center points, and then sew together in just the same way. And just to mention to leave a turning gap in one side of about 4 or 5 inches so that we can turn the whole bag through. So let's put this together. So I have the outside of the bag, the right side out, the lining is inside out, and I'm just going to push the lining around the bag, or push the bag inside the lining, make sure that the flap and all of the straps are out of the way, and line up the side seams. So I'll just pop, there they are, a few pins just into the corners just so I know that the seams are lined up, and then we'll sew all the way around the top. There we go. So literally all the way around. Then we'll turn the whole thing through the turning gap. and then sew the gap closed. I'm just going to turn the iron on. There we go. And then we're going to push the lining inside the bag and press it. And then back to the machine, and we're going to top stitch all the way around. Make sure the handles are, or the straps are now facing out of the way. Let's pull those up there. Lengthen the stitch a little, and sew. So now we need to put the drawstring around here for the ribbon to pull through, or the cord to pull through, whatever you're using. And the reason I've left that until last right now is because I want the channel to be sewn through the lining and the outer fabric. If it was only sewn through the outer fabric, we could have put it on earlier on, but then when you gather it up, the lining's not going to gather at the same pace, if that makes sense. So it's best to put that on last. So I've cut my strip of fabric. I have needed to join this at the back, but if you place your join centrally in the back, then that's fine. And I'm going to fold the end over by about 1/2 inch and press. Same with this side, and press. And then I'm just going to sew across those ends. Same on this one. And then fold the edges of the fabric over by 1/4 inch, 6 millimeters, and press it. And again, if you have some spray starch or best press or something like that, then that'll help to keep the crease crisp. Then we'll turn it over and do the same from the other side. So these edges aren't quite meeting in the middle. Then let's find the centre back. So let's take my ruler and let's make this, there we go, about 1 inch from the top. And you can draw a line if you like, actually, to make sure you've got the right line. And the centre point is here. Now this is a heat erasable pen, not really designed for fabric. So do a little test first if you're going to mark your fabric in an area that will be seen, just in case it stains the fabric. So starting at the back, I know where my centre back is because I've got a seam. If you don't have a seam, then just make a little mark where the centre is. And we're going to put lots of pins in again. So just up to the centre there, carry on along the line. I mean, obviously if you've got a very heavily patterned fabric, then you're not going to see the line very well. You could use chalk instead, or you could just keep pinning and measuring as you go. This is going to go around the side and meet at the front. Now there will be a gap in between the two ends, and that's what we want, so don't worry about that. They don't meet exactly, there'll be maybe a couple of inches gap. That's fine. Let's take this side around here. And then we're going to sew across the top and across the bottom to hold that in place, but leave these ends open. And make sure you backstitch quite a few times over the ends, because that seam will really need strengthening, and I'm sewing quite close to the fold of the fabric. What we need to do now is to take my ribbon or cord and bob it on a safety pin and thread it through the channel. So that looks a little bit long actually, but we can always cut it down a little bit if we need to. So just keep threading this through all the way around till we pop out the other end. I'm going to just cut these down slightly, they're a little bit too long, and then we can tie the front. Fasten over the flap, and your backpack's finished. Just shorten those straps a little bit again now. There. So I think we need one final press and we're ready to go. So now we're all pressed and finished and we're ready to go. So I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial and I hope you enjoy making yours, and I shall see you again soon. Bye bye.